of the regular meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment will now begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this live broadcast of our virtual meeting today, January 21st, 2021. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Matt Perry and I'm Chair of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. I'll now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of quorum.
Finlayson. We'll circle back to that. Johannesson.
Aye.
Ogiba.
Here.
Perry.
Here.
Sandberg.
Here.
Softly.
Aye.
Karova.
Aye.
Wang.
Here.
And Mr. Softly, or excuse me, Mr. Finlayson. You might need to press *6.
I'm here.
Oh, lovely. So with that, we have 8 members present. Thank you.
Great. We have quorum, and so let's proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, available at lims, lims.minneapolismn.gov. Is there a motion to approve this agenda?
So moved, Finlayson. Second, Sandberg.
It's moved and second. Is there any discussion? I'm not seeing any. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Finlayson.
Aye.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Ogiba.
Yes.
Perry.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Aye.
Softly.
Aye.
Karova.
Aye.
Wang.
Aye.
That's 8 yeas, and I forgot to mention that Mr. Hutchins mentioned before this meeting that he would be absent, but that's 8 yeas.
Okay, the motion passes and we have an approved agenda. I believe all of the board members have seen a copy of the minutes from the January 7th, 2020 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Finlayson. Second, Sandberg.
It's moved and second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll? And if you weren't here, please indicate by saying abstain.
Finlayson.
Aye.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Ogiba.
Yes.
Perry.
Aye.
Sandberg.
Aye.
Softly.
Aye.
Karova.
Aye.
Wang.
Aye.
That's 8 yeas.
That motion passes, so the meeting minutes from the Zoning Board of Adjustment January 7th, 2021 meeting are approved. Mr. Ellis, are there any petitions or communications?
Chair Perry, members of the board, I have 2 communications this evening. The first is an update on 4724 York Avenue South. That did go to council. Appellants requested of council To get some additional time, they were going to have additional surveys and also do a geotechnical report related to the groundwater to try to demonstrate that it would be infeasible to go deeper. Council granted that request. It was sent back to the biz committee and has been continued for 3 cycles to give the applicants time to gather those materials and go back before biz, back before the committee. So when I know more at the end of February, I will update the Board of Adjustment again as to the ongoing saga, for lack of a better term, on this property. And the other is, Chair, you had requested information related to the timeline for reappointments. We've just recently gotten that. It will be going to the City Planning Commission Committee of the Whole on February 11th, full Planning Commission on the 22nd of February, the Biz Committee on March 2nd, and full council on March 12th. Now that's for the reappointments. We're still in the process of getting ready and getting scheduled for to refill the upcoming vacancy. So, are there any questions?
I don't have any. Are there any questions of Mr. Ellis?
Seeing none, thank you, Chair, members of the board.
Yep, thank you. So with that, let's review the agenda. I will read the agenda number and the address of the project and state whether it's slated for consent, continuance, withdrawal, return, or discussion. I'll talk about what consent and discussion items are. Consent items are those that will be passed without discussion by the board. We'll be adhering to the staff recommendation found on your agenda under the items recommended motion section. Importantly, any applicable conditions will be listed in the same section. If you agree with this recommendation, including any applicable conditions, you need to do nothing and the board will pass it as recommended. Please check in with the staff member assigned to that item if you have any questions following the decision. If you disagree with the recommendation, please indicate you'd like to speak against the item when I ask, and we'll put it on the discussion agenda. Discussion items are those items for which the board will take public testimony, deliberate on, and make a decision. After the public testimony has been heard from each particular discussion item, I will close the public hearing for that agenda item. Once I close the public hearing for an item, no additional public testimony will be taken, but staff may be asked to address board questions. After the public hearing for an item is closed, board members will then discuss and act on motions, and the chair only votes in the case of a tie. So let's review the items. Agenda item number 5 is 5116 Vincent Avenue South. The applicant is asking this item be continued until our zoning board adjustment meeting on March 18th, 2021, and we can discuss this more when we review requested continuances. Agenda item number 6 is 109 through 111 31st Street East, also known as 3111 First Avenue South. The staff is recommending this item for consent. Is there anyone here to speak against this item? I see and hear no one. Agenda item number 7 is 3501 Aldridge Avenue South. This item is being withdrawn. Approval of the agenda with this item on it acknowledges this, and no further action on the part of the board is required. Agenda item number 8 is 2409 First Avenue South. This is a discussion item. And agenda item number 9 is 3923 Sheridan Avenue South. Staff is recommending this item for consent. Is there anyone to speak against this item? I see and hear no one. Okay, let's review the agenda for those items that are being recommended for consent. They are items number 6 and 9. Is there a motion to adopt these items on consent?
So moved, Finlayson. Second, Sandberg.
There is a
Aye.
Ogiba,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Softly,
Aye.
Karova,
Aye.
Wang.
Aye.
That's 7 yeas.
So that motion passes. For those of you who are here for agenda items number 6 and 9, your land use requests are approved. Good luck with your projects. Let's now review items requesting a continuance. Item number 5, which is 5116 Vincent Avenue South. The applicant is requesting a continuance until our March 18th, 2021 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting. Would staff please provide background on the request for continuance of this item?
Thank you, Chair Perry and members of the board. This item is a request for a setback variance regarding the location of an existing garage at 5116 Vincent Avenue South. This was originally continued from the board's scheduled hearing on November 12th, 2020. The applicant had requested a continuance at that time so that they could have some more time to have their own survey of the property prepared and submitted as part of the supporting materials for this application. Leading up to this hearing scheduled today, the applicant has requested an additional continuance to give them additional time for preparation of that survey that they have requested.
Okay, are there any questions about what staff has said on the request for a continuance? I have one question just to make sure that the applicant, I want to make sure that the timeline for our 60 and 120 day clock is in order, because we must be getting, going out to March 18th must be getting us close to that 120 day clock. Can you comment on that, Mr. Kohlhaas?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair Perry. This item, staff had previously extended the decision deadline by the additional 60 days as granted by Minnesota Statutes 1599, and the applicant's representative has further granted a voluntary extension of the decision period until May 31st, 2021.
Okay. Just wanted to be, it didn't seem to say that in the packet, so I wanted to be sure that that had been covered. Oh, okay. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor of continuing this item?
Waniger?
Mr. Waniger, you certainly may speak in favor of the request for continuance if you'd like.
Yeah, I think, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I ordered a survey in the beginning of December. It was supposed to be done before Christmas, and that didn't happen. The surveyors backed up. So I know the staff wanted some time ahead of this meeting to be able to review those materials. And it was just getting too close to the to today's date to get the survey, and I still don't have the survey, and allow staff to review it. So that's the reason.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Any questions of Mr. Waniger? I see none. So is there anyone who would like to speak against continuing this item? I see no one. Is there any board comment? I see no board comment. Is there a motion to continue the land use request for 5116 Vincent Avenue South to our March 18th, 2021 meeting?
So moved. Finlayson. Second, Sandberg.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Finlayson.
Aye.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Eba,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Softly,
Aye.
Smee Karoba,
Aye.
Wang.
Aye. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you. That's 7 yeas.
So that motion passes, and that means the land use application request for 5116 Vincent Avenue South will be continued to our March 18th, 2021 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting. Let's move on to our one discussion item. This is an appeal of the zoning administrator, and I always give some procedural notes before we hear from staff and from the appellant and others who might want to speak. Appeals of the zoning administrator are not variances. They're also not determinations on whether to grant non-conforming use certificates. The board's job is narrowly defined to determine whether the zoning administrator correctly interpreted and administered the current provision of the zoning ordinance or ordinances that are subject of the appeal. Furthermore, it's not the board's responsibility to determine whether the zoning ordinance is correct or should be changed. We're not a policy-making body. In this particular case, we are addressing a narrowly defined technical issue. Did the zoning administrator correctly determine that the use of the property is assisted living? As a matter of due process, the appellant is afforded a broad latitude in the testimony they provide to make their case. However, since written testimony has been provided for the record, this body will ask the appellant to be respectful of the amount of time they are using in providing their testimony today. The same broad latitude in testimony provided applies only to the appellant. It is not afforded to others testifying who are not the appellant or a member of the appellant's team. If I feel public testimony or board member questions or comments are straying from the aforementioned purpose, I will interrupt the speaker and ask them to address the decision before this body. It's not to be rude, but to be respectful of the purpose of these proceedings. So with that, Mr. Kohlhaas.
Thank you, Chair Perry and members of the board. Could IT staff pull up a copy of the slides that staff has submitted for this presentation? I'll begin just to summarize. This item is an appeal of the decision of the zoning administrator regarding the property at 2409 First Avenue South. Yep, this is the correct slide. Thank you. I'll go into more detail as part of this presentation, but just for some quick background, the appellants purchased this property in 2005 and began operation at that time under a Housing with Services registration from the Minnesota Department of Health, which allows for provision of health and supportive services for residents. And a brief summary of staff's position regarding this appeal. The zoning administrator has determined that the appellant's use of the property in this manner is categorized as assisted living for the purposes of administering the zoning ordinance. I will also note that the appellant's use in this manner was never lawfully established for the purposes of the zoning code. So in that context, I may also refer to the appellant's use as the proposed use, even though it has been going on at this property for a number of years. The appellants are appealing the zoning administrator's determination that their use of the property is categorized as assisted living for these purposes. The appellants argue that their use should not be categorized as assisted living for these purposes. Next slide, please. A little more deeper background on the property itself. The subject property is located in the R4 multiple family zoning district. It does have a lot area of just under 6,000 square feet and a lot width of approximately 47 feet. It was originally constructed as a multiple family dwelling with 13 units in 1913. This slide is a photo from the assessor's office showing the front of the property, and this is the structure that was built as a 13-unit residential building in 1913. Multiple family dwellings with this number of units remain a permitted use in the R4 district, and multiple family dwelling appears to be the last lawfully established use on the subject property. Next slide, please. Assisted living is a separate and distinct use in the zoning ordinance compared to multiple family dwelling. This slide shows a portion of table 546-1 from section 546.30 of the zoning code, and it lists the permitted and conditional uses in the residential zoning districts, including the R4 district that the subject property is located in. Towards the bottom, you can see highlighted there's a row that includes board and care home, nursing home, and assisted living. So these three are each distinct delineated uses, each with their own definitions in the zoning code, but they are grouped together in the use tables and often regulated identically for many purposes of the zoning code. And you can see this row, including assisted living, under the congregate living group, so to speak, in the use table here. You can see that assisted living is a conditional use in the R4 district. Towards the middle of this page, you can see another row for multiple family dwelling with 4 units or more. And just to highlight that these are 2 separate and distinct uses in the zoning code in sort of different subcategories within the residential uses in general. And multiple family dwelling, again, is a permitted use in the R4 district. Next slide, please. Section 520.160 of the zoning code lists many of the definitions used for administration of the zoning ordinance, and the same section includes the following language, which I quote, "Unless otherwise expressly stated or unless the context clearly indicates a different meaning, the words and phrases in the following list of definitions shall, for the purposes of this zoning ordinance, have meanings indicated." Next slide, please. That same section of the code, Section 520.160, defines assisted living as follows: a facility registered with the Minnesota Department of Health where individualized home care aid services or home management services are provided to residents either by the management or by providers under contract with the management. And we can actually stay on this slide for the remainder of my presentation. Now, again, the appellants are the current owners of the subject property, and they have stated that they began operating at this location in 2005 under registration as a housing with services provider under the Minnesota Department of Health. And these housing with services registrations allows for the provision of health and supportive services for residents. The appellants do also hold some additional licenses from the Department of Health and the Minnesota Department of Human Services related to this property, again, in addition to the housing with services registration. State statute lists some examples of health and supportive services that may be provided by housing with services operators. And those examples from state statute include but are not limited to professional nursing services, home health aid, central storage of medication, laundry services, assistance with personal funds, arranging outside medical or social services, or providing for transportation to outside services. The appellants in this case have provided some examples of services that they do provide to residents at this location that is the subject of this appeal. And examples provided by the appellants include medication reminders, exercise prompts, housekeeping, and hygienic assistance. Again, the zoning administrator has determined that the appellant's use of the property in this manner meets the definition of assisted living in the zoning code as a provider registered with the Minnesota Department of Health, where individualized home care aid services or home management services are provided to residents. And the appellants are appealing this determination that their use is assisted living. I'll provide some additional background on this situation as well. Lawful establishment of any use on a property in Minneapolis requires at minimum a building permit, and this applies for any proposed change of use between 2 distinct delineated uses in the zoning code, for example, multiple family dwelling and assisted living. And this requirement for a building permit, this is the case even if there is no construction that is proposed or any modifications that are proposed to the actual structure. An applicant would still need a building permit, even just to sort of change the operation of a property potentially. Assisted living is, again, a conditional use in the R4 district and would require approval of a conditional use permit by the Planning Commission, in addition to the building permit and other city licenses. As I mentioned previously, the permit and license history records for this property do not indicate lawful establishment of any other use on the property following establishment of the 13-unit building in 1913. Furthermore, assisted living uses in the R4 district also require a minimum lot area of 20,000 square feet and a minimum lot width of 80 feet. These lot size requirements have been in place since the city's current zoning ordinance, was adopted in 1999. Therefore, staff finds that it is not possible that the use of the property as assisted living, as defined by the zoning ordinance, could have been lawfully established at this property after adoption of the current zoning ordinance in 1999. In conclusion, staff recommendation is for denial of this appeal of the determination of the zoning administrator regarding the appellant's use of the property as assisted living. A written statement by the appellants is in the packets, which was attached to the staff report published for the public viewing and provided to members of the board prior to this hearing. And I believe the appellant's representative is in attendance during this hearing as well. This concludes my presentation, but I'm available for questions if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Kohlhaas. Are there questions of staff? Mr. Softly and then Mr. Sandberg.
Thank you, Chair Perry. Thank you, Mr. Kohlhaas. I'm wondering if you can give me any information, and if you can't, that's fine. But why is the lot dimension requirement so large for an assisted use facility in the R4 district?
Chair Perry, board member Softly, I believe those dimensional requirements were more intended with the understanding or the intent of these uses, assisted living uses and similar congregate living uses, be on larger properties and typically expecting that it be a larger facility and perhaps more concentrated on larger properties as opposed to diffused in smaller buildings or on smaller properties.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sandberg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Perry and Mr. Kohlhaas. I have two questions. One is, does the lot requirement preclude the applicant from applying for the contester applying for
Ms. Brandt has kind of earned a reputation as one of our foremost experts on congregate living as it pertains to the code. So she's very helpful and knows her stuff related to that. I guess I'll go back to Board Member Softly's question. The reason for the lot minimums was, as Mr. Kohlhaas noted, the code kind of anticipated a more institutional type of uses. And I think one of the reasons that you're seeing these sorts of things come now before you is the way the state and then the counties, as disbursement of money has occurred, they have kind of changed their programs over the last couple of decades. When our regulations were put in place, they were perfectly in alignment with the state regulations. Since then, the state has kind of morphed and changed and tried different things and are trying smaller home situations versus the larger institutions on a regular basis, but our code hasn't moved to adapt adapt to it. We haven't adopted any regulations, and our code hasn't adapted very rapidly related to that. It is something that is on CPED's work plan, but it will be a little bit yet before we can really address congregate living uses as a whole. It does need a pretty big overhaul related to that. So I think that's where you're seeing some of these discrepancies between our minimum lot area, assuming that they were going to do a large institutional type use, versus these sort of newer housing with services programs, which wasn't even a thing, if I understand it, back in the mid 90s when a lot of these regulations were put in place. And then I can speak to the reasonable accommodation if need be. I'm not sure if Alyssa might be better to do it. I believe they technically could apply for reasonable accommodation. I don't know whether that would be granted. That would be a determination by the city attorney's office and possibly the zoning administrator. Ms. Brandt?
Thank you, Chair Perry, Board Member Sandberg. The housing with services registration doesn't necessarily provide services to populations that are eligible for reasonable accommodation under the Federal Fair Housing Act. As Mr. Ellis mentioned, it is something that staff would have to review in pretty fine-grained detail along with the city attorney's office in order to verify that the population does fall under one of those protected groups under the Fair Housing Act, as well as verifying that the reasonable accommodation would not pose a fundamental alteration to the requirements of the zoning code.
Does that help out, Mr. Sandberg?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any other questions of staff? I see none. Let's open the public hearing. Is the appellant present?
Can you hear
me? If you press *6, you can.
Can you hear me?
Phone. Yes, I can.
All right.
Your name, your name and address, sir.
My name is Joe Cuoco, and you want the address of the location that's in question?
We just need an address for our record keeping.
All right. So I will give you our headquarter address if that's okay then.
Sure.
So our headquarters is 2515 Wabash, Wabash, Wabash Ave, Suite 300, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55114.
Thank you. And please proceed with your testimony.
So Chair and board members, I first want to say thank you for allowing me this time to speak on behalf of Supported Living Solutions. We are an organization that provides both housing as well as services to people with mental health issues, chemical dependencies, long-term homelessness, and we also provide housing. We help find housing for people with disabilities as well. The location in question we call Serenity Place, 2409 First Ave South, is an apartment building that the focus is people with mental health issues, and most there need some type of help in order to live as independent as possible. But it is an apartment complex. Nothing has changed on that. They have their own lease, their own key, come and go as they please. They don't have to check in with any staff. Any type of services is based on the client's or residents' needs. We don't have nursing stations. However, if there's nursing needed, we can provide up to 4 hours of nursing at the location. But the way we want people to see this is think of an apartment complex that is geared to people that are 55 years and older. We're the same type of thing, except we're gearing towards people that have mental health issues. So the people that are 55 years and older, they receive services as well. That does not make them an assisted living. Neither does that make us an assisted living. So we provide services to that location through the state's comprehensive license, which just allows us to provide the services there. The comprehensive license requires us to have housing with services registration at any location we provide services to. So this means if we go to an apartment building that has nothing to do with us, and say it's an apartment building with 100 units, and we plus other organizations provide at least 7 units there with customized living services, the county waiver services. From what the city zoning staff member Alex is saying, that would make that building an assisted living as well, because it's no different than what we're doing. We're providing what's called customized living, and it could be provided to any apartment, whether it, according to Minnesota Statute 144D, customized living can be provided in one apartment or all the apartments in the complex. And I do understand what was said before, that perhaps the city's rules and policies have not come up to date. But I do think it's a bit unfair to label a building that people are just coming and going. They just need help to live as independent, rather than be placed in an institution to be also listed as an assisted living just because they are receiving services. That decision would literally impact hundreds of apartment buildings like ours, and other landlords who do not have a focus on disability would be impacted as well, just because their tenants may be receiving this type of service. So with that in mind, I yield the floor, and I do ask that his decision's overturned and that we're not considered an assisted living building just because people there need help in order to live independently.
Thank you, Mr. Cuoco, for your testimony. I will just mention again, you may have heard it already, that this board is not a policy board, so we can't really change policy. That's for the city council to do. Okay. And zoning staff. So whatever decision we make is not going to be one that is made to fly in the face of current policy. Board members can urge policy changes, but we are not the body that makes the changes themselves. We rule on the existing code. So with that, are there any questions of Mr. Cuoco? Mr. Ogiba?
Thank you, Chair Perry, and thank you, Mr. Cuoco, for your testimony today and for joining this call. I have a question regarding just one statement in your written submission, as well as in your testimony. You refer that each individual apartment in each location, they do have their own lease for each individual space. And I just have a question regarding those leases. Is part of those leases, are there amounts of, you list on your website for your property and things, a number of services that are I'm going to say, it says included on your website, I'll say offered for your space. Do your leases specify in there what services are included for residents in your building? Is that a requirement of lease that those be included in there, or are those contracted for and paid for separately of the lease on the apartment?
Mr. Chair and board members, our lease is separate from any services that a tenant might receive in that building, and that is specific according to state statute as well. Because a client can refuse services or discontinue services, that does not mean that their tenancy all of a sudden ends. They're still allowed to live in that apartment. Just because they discontinue services doesn't make a difference. So it's actually two separate. They come in, they sign a lease, and then the determination of any services is made at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Cuoco. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Are there any other questions of the appellant? I see none. Are there any people who would like to speak in opposition to this request by the appellant? I don't think we have anybody in the call queue for speaking against. Mr. Softly, you have a question?
Yes, Chair Perry, I do actually, for the applicant, if he's still available.
Yeah.
Mr.
I'm still
Cuoco,
here.
to the best of your ability, can you explain to me whether or not you'd be required to, as the owner of the building and as the landlord, would you be required to hold the state licensing if the services were provided by a different legal entity who then came into your building to perform those services? Can you elaborate a little bit for me as to how the regulatory framework works from the state side?
I can certainly do that, Mr. Chair and board members. So the way that we are set up is that there isn't actually, we work with several different holding companies, and they actually purchase the building, and then we master lease the building from the holding company, and then the tenants come and get the lease from us. But they do have an option. They don't have to receive services, and not everyone receives services from our organization. In this world where, with such a big focus on people-centered plan and care, they have the right to choose whichever service organization they want. So there are people that do get services from other organizations than ours. It's just that we have the majority there. And that's pretty much the same throughout Minneapolis with other organizations that do the same thing as us. They'll have the majority of services, but there will be a few that choose another service provider. Does that answer your question?
It's very helpful. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cuoco.
Are there any other questions from of Mr. Cuoco from the board? I see none, and I don't think there's anyone else to speak on this matter. So with that, I'll close the public hearing. Board comment. While people are thinking, Mr. Sandberg, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Perry. I think the zoning administrator interpreted the ordinance properly, the way it's written. I think the ordinance is not written sufficiently well to accommodate uses like this that have evolved and may be beneficial to the city to be available, but I don't think it's our job to make that decision. I think the ordinance needs to change. So I would send this on with a recommendation that the ordinances be reviewed, although we do agree with the zoning administrator.
Thanks for those comments. Anyone else? Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, sorry. I was a little late there, but I agree with Mr. Sandberg. Totally.
All right, thanks for that comment. Anyone else like to weigh in? Ms. Samarie Karova?
Smakarova, thank you. I agree with the previous statements. I also wonder if there's, I think that I would like to somehow format our recommendation as part of our vote, the pending vote, to somehow assist in the review of the code, or sort of provide some guidance to why this might be an impetus for the change of the code or update of the code. If that's not possible because it's not part of the process, I understand, but I agree that the code is outdated. I agree that this is probably a very prevalent and common use of, it's probably a very prevalent business model and a needed service in the city. And so as the city is growing and as housing shortages persist and as mental health issues persist, that I think it would be wise for the city to review their code and allow for more of this type of business to operate.
So I'll respond to your comment about fashioning some sort of commentary with this. I think the commentary is this discussion right now, and the comments that Mr. Sandberg, Johannesson, and yourself have made and others may make them as well, that the code is insufficient for the times. So staff has heard that, and if the item is appealed, the city council will hear that as well. And the city council members may hear it anyhow through staff that are ruling on that. So I'd say that's how it gets to city council.
Awesome.
Okay. Mr. Ogiba?
Thank you, Chair Perry. I'm really struggling with the idea that the code to even initially break a threshold for assisted living is 20,000 square feet of a lot size, minimum lot size. And we're looking at a property that has a minimum lot size of 5,500 square feet or thereabouts. And it just seems to me that to classify something as assisted living that doesn't even, that is 25% of a minimum that would get you to even begin a process of qualifying as something, just, I don't see how those two things fit, right? It sort of feels like we're struggling to know what to call this building, what to call the services that are here, and we're trying to apply the closest thing that's there. And you know, if I understand this correctly, if we uphold the decision of the zoning administrator here, our board is essentially saying this is an assisted living facility. And I don't know how, and I can reconcile in my own mind that this is an assisted living facility if by code it's not even within, you know, it's not even in any sort of realm of the size that the city would determine that this is an assisted living facility, or this is how you can be licensed to be an assisted living facility here. So I'm actually having really trouble on that particular point of all of this in qualifying it as such. So I'm actually leaning without other and kind of disagreeing with some of my fellow board members here in that I would actually side with the applicant here that I just think this is too far away from what would be normally described as an assisted living to fit into that particular slot or that particular definition by city code.
Thanks for those comments, Mr. Ogiba. Anyone else like to comment?
Chair Perry, John Finlayson.
Yes, Mr. Finlayson, go ahead.
You know, code is, as we all experience, is black and white, and life is shades of gray, and time turns the shade of gray over to a kaleidoscope effect, and things evolve. We're stuck with what the code is, and so I agree with the sentiment of the bulk of the board members that we have to find for the zoning administrator, but I also feel that, you know, the message will be sent along and should be sent along that this area needs to be adjusted to the realities of time. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Anyone else like to weigh in? Mr. Sandberg?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Perry. Based on the discussion so far, I'd move staff recommendation.
Staff recommendation is the motion is to move staff recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Wang has seconded the motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Finlayson.
Aye.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Ogiba.
No.
Sandberg.
Aye.
Softly.
Nay.
Smikarova.
Aye.
Wang.
Aye.
5 yea, 2 nay.
And that motion passes, so the appeal is denied. And Mr. Cuoco, you can see staff about what your options are going forward. So we, from our last, we have some old business from our last meeting. We elected a slate of candidates. I shouldn't say elected. We nominated a slate of candidates to serve as chair and vice chair for 2021. And I am one of those people, and Mr. Softly, the current vice chair, is the other. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Finlayson to conduct the election at our annual meeting, which this is.
Thank you, Chair Perry. We have a slate of candidates. They've already been selected. I suggest that we move by acclamation. I ask that the clerk call the roll to affirm this.
Yes, I'm just pulling up that form. With that, Finlayson.
Aye.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Ogiba.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Aye.
Softly.
Aye.
Smikarova.
Aye.
Wang.
Aye.
And Chair Perry, normally I wouldn't call on you, but given the circumstances, I'm not sure. Are you, I would think you'd be eligible for a vote in this case.
Yes, that's true.
He has a say.
In that case. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. In that case, Perry.
Aye.
Great. So that's 8 yeas.
Well, that piece of business is done. Chair Perry, I hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finlayson. So with that, we've completed all the items on the agenda for this meeting. Are there any other items that we need to consider that we haven't? I see none. And so without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Our next meeting will be February 4th, 2021. Thank you, everyone. And Taylor, if I could have a word with you before we sign off.
Sure thing.
Can you?
Folks, we're still recording. Please hold on 1 second. Thank you so much.
Thank you.